What if everything you thought you knew about the turning point of World War II was incomplete? We're taught a very clean, satisfying narrative. D-Day in 1944, the Allies storming the beaches, the beginning of the end for Hitler. It's the story of our liberation. But what if that story intentionally sidelines the single most catastrophic, decisive, and brutal confrontation of the entire war? A battle so vast it makes the Western Front look, by comparison, like a secondary theater? Today, we're going into the urban inferno of Stalingrad, a battle that was not just about a city, but about the complete annihilation of an enemy. A battle where the average life expectancy for a new Soviet soldier was less than 24 hours, and a battle whose outcome was so shocking, Nazi Germany had to announce it by playing funeral music on national radio. By the end of this, you'll understand why many historians call this the true turning point of World War II, and I'll reveal one deeply ironic reason why this Soviet victory became so awkward. For the post-war world that its memory had to be managed, we'll save that twist for the very end. The stakes. Why this city? Summer 1942. After the failure to take Moscow, Hitler launches Case Blue. The goal is practical and psychological. Seize the oil fields of the Caucasus to fuel his starving war machine and capture the city that bears the Soviet dictator's name, Stalingrad. For Hitler, this wasn't just strategy, it was a personal vendetta against Joseph Stalin. He allegedly ordered the annihilation of the city's population. For Stalin, the order was equally absolute, not one step back. He forbade civilians from leaving, believing their presence would force the soldiers to fight harder. Over 500,000 people were trapped in a city that was about to become a killing ground. On August 23rd, the Luftwaffe unleashed hell. In a single day, aerial bombing reduced much of Stalingrad to a smoldering landscape of rubble and twisted metal. One resident described the earth trembling. The stage wasn't just set for a battle, it was pulverized for it. The Germans thought the rubble would make conquest easier. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. That rubble would become the perfect terrain for a new kind of nightmare, rat warfare. The descent into Rattenkrieg rat war. As German troops of the 6th Army under General Friedrich Paulus pushed in, they didn't march through streets. They disappeared into a labyrinth. Soviet General Vasily Chuikov, commanding the 62nd Army, issued a brutal, ingenious order: hug the enemy. Stay so close to the Germans that their superior artillery and air power became useless. For fear of hitting their own men, warfare collapsed from army to man versus man in a concrete jungle. Large units were useless. Combat was waged by tiny storm groups. A handful of men, machine gunner, flamethrower, sniper, engineer with explosives, would infiltrate a shattered building. They'd fight for a staircase, a single room, a corridor. One building, later named Pavlov's house, was held by a Soviet platoon for 58 days. The Germans lost more men trying to take that one building than they had in the entire 1940 conquest of France. Think about that for a second. And above this chaos, a silent, personal war took place. Snipers like the legendary Vasily Zaitsev turned the ruins into a hunting ground. Every blown-out window, every collapsed roof, was a potential lair. This wasn't just about killing, it was about terror, about paralyzing the enemy's will to move. The battle had become existential, a grinding attrition measured in meters and corpses. The turn, Operation Uranus. While Paulus's finest bled themselves white in the city, Soviet generals Zhukov and Vasilevsky were planning a masterstroke. They saw the weak link. The 6th Army's flanks were guarded not by Germans, but by under-equipped, demoralized Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian allies. The Germans were looking at the map of the city. The Soviets were looking at the map of the entire region. On November 19, 1942, Operation Uranus exploded. Soviet tank divisions smashed through the flanks. Within 4 days, the pincers met. Nearly 300,000 Axis troops were trapped in a frozen pocket around Stalingrad. Hitler's response was delusional. Hold fast. I will supply you by air. Luftwaffe Chief Goering promised 300 tons a day. They barely managed 105. The 6th Army was ordered to fight on, starving and freezing, in a siege within a siege. The human cost, statistics of suffering. The numbers from Stalingrad are so large they become almost meaningless. Let's try to give them meaning. Total casualties both sides, estimates range from 1.7 to over 2 million. The bloodiest battle in human history. Axis losses, the entire German 6th Army was destroyed. Of approximately 91,000 Germans taken prisoner in the final surrender, only about 5,000 would ever return home years later. They died of starvation, disease, and forced labor in Soviet camps. Soviet losses, over 1.1 million Red Army soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The sacrifice was unimaginable. A German private wrote home, "Stalingrad is hell on earth. We attack daily. If we gain 20 meters, the Russians throw us back at night." It was a war of endurance, where the will of the Soviet soldier, often maligned in early war Nazi propaganda as subhuman, proved unbreakable. This was a war of annihilation, and at Stalingrad, the direction of that annihilation permanently shifted. Legacy and the open loop resolved. The surrender of Field Marshal Paulus, who Hitler had just promoted hoping he'd commit suicide, was a psychic earthquake. It was the first time a German field marshal was ever captured alive. Globally, resistance movements found new hope. For the Nazis, the propaganda machine shifted to total war. Militarily, the German initiative on the Eastern Front was lost forever. The Red Army began its long, bloody march west to Berlin. So, here's that awkward twist I promised. Stalingrad was the undeniable, pivotal victory over fascism in Europe, but the victor was the Soviet Union, a communist state. As the Cold War set in, this created a profound problem for the emerging Western narrative. How could the Great Patriotic War, the cornerstone of Soviet legitimacy, be reconciled with the new enemy? The answer, as argued by some historians and commentators, was a subtle politics of forgetting. The Western war story was recentered. The heroics of D-Day, the Bulge, and the Pacific took cultural precedence. The Eastern Front, where roughly 75 to 80% of all German military casualties occurred, was often reduced to a brutal, vague backdrop. To fully acknowledge Stalingrad was to acknowledge that a socialist army bore the brunt and broke the back of the Nazi war machine. That was an inconvenient truth in an era of ideological confrontation. So we remember Stalingrad as a tragedy, an epic of suffering, which it was, but we often forget to remember it as the decisive triumph that made the later, more celebrated Allied victories even possible. It's a reminder that history isn't just about what happened, but about who gets to tell the story and what purpose that story serves decades later. What other World War II events do you think are misunderstood or overshadowed by popular narrative? Let's discuss in the comments. If this deep dive changed your perspective, a like and subscribe really helps. Until next time, dig deeper,